you, Ale, for the introduction. Yeah, everybody sit down. Start relaxing and talking. Yeah, my name is Chen. I'm host of Start Guangzhou, and I'm very happy today to have Greg Bernader to be our guest to share his ideas and his work on startup. So, as usual, to get started, we start with a little bit of self-introduction. I'm really interested in knowing, why you chose China, and why this is, and how this is related to what you did.
Why China?
Yeah.
So, hi everyone. First of all, thank you for having me. It's fun to see this mixed crowd here. Why China? I think I had a bit of a crush with Asia in general since I was young. I was really interested in China, and finally I came to China, I think about 5 years ago the first time, or 6 years ago the first time. It just felt like a new space, it felt like something different from where I grew up in Europe, different from my trips in the States, Latin America and all that. It felt like a completely new space where completely new things can happen and be reinvented. So it's different, it's difficult, and at the same time it's very rewarding to be here and to interact with people. So I think that's the space for reinvention mostly.
Okay, so we learned that you are originally from Switzerland and you got educated in the USA and England. Can you tell us a little bit more about the reasons behind your decision to get educated globally?
Right. I think it was more than a decision. It felt like a curiosity to go, not so much to a new school, but to experience something new, to meet new people, to live in a new culture, and really, really start, kind of exposing myself to something completely new. So I went to the States, I spent some time in Ecuador, in Tanzania, also as part of the studies, in England, as you said. Mm-hmm. So all of these are kind of, I think, interesting ways of looking at the world from a different perspective. So I think that's what I got from the studies.
Okay, so from your career experience in such a globally environment, what are the three biggest learnings from that you have, and how does that transform you as a person? What are
It's a big question. I think my first experience abroad as a student was in the US. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that impressed me was that I was looking at the map of the world in my dorm room. And it's the first time that I would see a map of the world where Europe was not at the center of the map. The US was at the center of the map, right? So all of a sudden I thought, okay, this is a different way of looking at it. I thought Europe is the center of the world. No, here, the US is the center of the world. And if you're in Asia, then probably Asia is the center of the world. So just thinking about these small things and being exposed to these things, I think that's the first big thing that you wouldn't get if you just study books at home, right? Mm-hmm. So you asked for three things. That's, I think, number one. Yeah. Another one is obviously the again, I think more than the content is the people, and being exposed to people that are maybe as curious as you are, but that just come from a different background, and being at the intersection of these different ways of thinking is really rich for me. And I've always, every time that I went to study abroad, I've made the best friends in my life. So best friends would be number two. If I have to think of a last one, I think it also, there's a realization for me that schools are actually not the best places for learning. And this may be a bit of a controversial one, but I think as a startup community you can maybe relate to that. I think
I heard about that from the Israelis.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, I think by the time something has made it to school, it has to have gone through all sorts of approval, peer reviews, and it takes years for being adopted and all of that. And in a world like ours, it goes so fast that you're already too late if you go to learn at school. So it's more about, for me, school was more an excuse to be in a new environment, find new people to interact with, play with, and study from. So it's more the experience than the school, the content itself, I would say.
Okay. So before we head over to the work that you are doing now, can you also share some of your experience while working at Swatch and WEF that have been helpful for you in establishing yourself as a consultant and writer for business literature?
Sure. So Swatch was a very small stint. It was 6 months. It was my first work experience. But I think I learned one thing from that experience, which was that you didn't need to have a lot of experience to come up with new ideas. It was a very free-flowing environment. Everybody, they didn't have fancy education or anything, but everybody was working on inventing a new watch or a PR campaign or a new branding campaign, etc. So that was cool, but yeah, 6 months, so it was very short. The WEF, so the World Economic Forum, in Davos, that was for me very, very inspiring, very formative for my own, I would say, personal and professional education. It was just very overwhelming, the type of people that you would meet and the diversity at the same time. So there's just one image, and it was like that all the time. Just one image stays for me. It was in 2005 in Davos. You had on the stage, it was something about development in Africa. And on the stage you had Thabo Mbeki, the ex-president of South Africa, together with Tony Blair, Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, and Bono. So it was like a panel of the absolute stars, all from completely different fields. They were coming together, philanthropy, arts, business, politics, and just being exposed to that kind of thinking for me was very, very rich. I didn't really understand. It was very inspiring at the moment. I didn't really understand how it would help me later on, but now I can see how much it was instrumental in, I guess, understanding the world and understanding how decisions are made at that level and how people think. And trying to bring a little bit of that thinking, that cross-cultural, cross-sectoral thinking into the places I work, into communities, incubators, companies.
Oh, that must be quite an experience.
I was.
So coming back to the work that you've been doing, so this probably would be the first question that related to your work. When and how did you learn about the business model generation book and the work of Alexander Osterwalder and the other authors? And maybe you can also briefly explain for people here today, who are not familiar with the BMC model and what it contains, and why it's different from the traditional business plan.
Yes, so Alex Osterwalder was actually a friend at university back when we were 19, 20, something like that, in Switzerland. And we were doing all our work together, right? So we were best buddies, we were doing all our work together. And he was always the laziest people in our group, right? He was always not doing the work, he was, just finding an excuse, etc. So that was my first experience with Alex.
Okay.
But then a few years later, so we kind of parted ways a bit, staying in touch just a little bit, but not much. But a few years later, I think it was 2009 or 10, just as the business model generation book came out, I was traveling and I was in Hong Kong, actually, at the airport. And I always like to go to the bookstore when I go to the airport. So I go to the bookstore and I look at the bestseller list, and at the top of the list there was Alex's book, and I was like, what? What is this? The laziest guy in my group, right? He's written a bestseller. And so I took a picture, I sent it to him, I'm like, what is going on? We have to meet, you have to explain to me what this is about. And we did meet, we started working together, based on this.
So honestly, are you jealous?
No, jealous, curious. No, I was definitely intrigued, and I say he was the laziest person. It's kind of a compliment at the end of the day, right? Because he actually created something for people that are not bothered about using complex vocabulary to express themselves in terms of value creation and entrepreneurship. So his laziness paid off at the end. So there, I'm jealous for that. Yes.
Okay. So, what made you decide to work, with their materials and become a strategizer with the BMC trainer? And what was so important, from your perspective, the work that they created?
Yeah. So if I can sum up the work that I do, it's all about helping individuals and group of people to, with innovation, in general, to reinvent something or to invent something new. And so I do a lot of workshops, a lot of processes, methodologies I use for that. But the business model canvas and the whole methodology, the whole toolbox around it, but it was cool because it was kind of the first time that you could have an object that was describing the system as a whole. Not just a product, not just a service or a strategy or something like that, but it describes the entire system. And when you work with reinvention, especially nowadays, you want to think about everything at the same time, not just your technology, product, services, etc. So the big picture, the fact that you had an object representing the big picture, that was very, very cool, very useful. And the second thing is this whole idea of when you try to invent something, you can't just do it in a linear fashion. You have to take iterative loops. You have to try something, doesn't work, you come back to the drawing board, you try something else again. So this whole iterative approach is very, very useful, very powerful. And so that's the other thing that I think we described in the new book that Alex uses as well. And when you are doing a workshop, you get people through these iterations already in 2 days, and you get to results a lot faster than if you would use another more linear method. So
yeah, that sounds like a really challenge for startups, particularly for younger entrepreneurs. I mean, they just came out of school, college, but they have technologies, but somehow they because of their life experience, they lack this kind of grand view of what the entire world and society, how they work. So, in what respect do you think, particularly for these younger startups entrepreneurs, that this kind of theory, how can this kind of theory help these people? I mean, is it actually useful at all if they don't have this kind of actual experiences?
Yeah, I think it's useful because it creates a process, a method to the madness. When you start with inventing a new idea, you kind of, you have a risk of being all over the place, right? Like you think of your strategy, of your product, your customers, your, what you want maybe, your desires, your vision. And so it all kind of gets mixed up in your head, I think, if you're new, especially if you don't have experience. So what this does is that it doesn't undermine your idea, doesn't undermine your, the research you've done with your customers, etc. But it puts a method and gives you tools to structure your thinking and to help you progress very practically through, through the building of whatever it is that you're doing. So in that sense, I think it's useful.
Yeah, I think this kind of methodology thing, to expand what you said a little bit more, for the younger entrepreneur, probably this kind of theory is the kind of, we call them a compass. Probably I don't have enough experience creating a company myself, but at least after I learn all this methodology, I know where to look. Right?
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think so I don't know if I would call it a compass. Maybe the compass is more maybe your vision or something like this.
Yeah.
And there could be a tool for that. Doesn't it's not part of this yet. But at least it creates maybe it creates a track for you to follow and to understand when you've reached milestones, when you've made progress. Make that tangible and obvious to you, so that you're making progress, even if you're failing on the way, etc.
Yeah. I mean, for anyone already involved in startups, we all know that actually it's not a romance. It's like you're constantly in agony, of thinking. You're deep, you're troubled with all these challenges. So can you tell us, based on your experience, where these companies and startups in particular, they struggles the most when it's come down to creating business ideas and testing their ideas? What are the top 5 pitfalls, when people want to start something?
Yeah, so there is probably a lot of pitfalls. I think what I see is, I think, so let's start with one. The very first one is that you want to use your creativity, you want to try and do something different from other people, right? And I think one pitfall is trying to say, this company has been successful, let me try and do something like that, because it's safe somehow, right? It's been proven, you want to get closer, maybe change one thing, etc. And I think if you do that, then you undermine yourself from the start, right? Because there is, especially now, the more different you are, now you actually have a chance of having an audience with the internet, etc. It's so much easier to reach people that think or that connect with you. So I think creativity is number one. The whole idea of prototyping, the whole idea of not being fixed on. So you have your vision, great, right? But you don't know how it's going to manifest in real life, how it's going to actually work. And this whole mindset of prototyping is the idea of exploring different possibilities at the same time, right? So, if for your business, maybe there's a low-cost version, maybe there's a luxury version, maybe there's a platform version, maybe there's a sharing economy version, whatever. But with this whole process of prototyping, you explore the many different ways that your idea could work. So, and that is something that people are not comfortable with, in companies or startups.
In established companies.
In established companies, even more than startups. Yes. So that's one, prototyping. I think experimentation is the other thing, which is once you have actually an idea on paper, maybe it's your best idea on paper, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work in the real world, right? So you want to go and rub against reality as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible, right? Especially if you're a startup. Companies have a lot of money in general, so it's less of an incentive. But it's actually a problem for them, right? Because they can spend more time understanding if an idea is viable or not. So the whole idea of experimentation, we'll talk about it a bit later, how that pans out, is important. You asked for 5. That's a tall order.
That's not. I hope it's not.
Yeah, I think we can find.
Can you get more detail?
We get more detail.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think those 3 things would be important.
Okay. So you have coached many companies with the implementation of DMC. Can you share a story of a company that you actually helped that had created a kind of real breakthrough with the insights came from developing their own DMC? Any examples?
Yeah. Yes. So there's many companies that I work with that some of their work is still confidential, so I can't really talk about it. But there's one actually that has made their work public.
Okay.
Michelin, the tire company, the French tire company. Okay, so they had this situation. It was 2 years ago maybe. They had this situation where they were very, very well placed at the top of their game, right? In terms of the luxury version of the tire, they had big market share. It was going very well for them. But they started to see that, especially based in China and other countries, they started to take a bigger market share at the bottom of the market, right? So a lot of basically low-cost offers coming up and starting to eat the main market share, the luxury version of the market share. So they were looking for a way to say, we need to play in this market, not only as a defensive move to protect our market, but also to exploit this opportunity that's there. So we designed a process where we had one big workshop with a global team of the company, 3-day workshop that was basically geared towards generating, I think we had 8 business model prototypes by the end of it. Just prototypes, right? 8 different ones. So they didn't have the answer by the end of the workshop. They had 8 possible answers about what the business would look like. Then we had a 2-3 months process where we tested the business models. We canceled some, we merged some others, we invented a new one. So that whole kind of process with the team. And then finally we came back into a last workshop where we said, okay, what did we learn? What is emerging as the solution, as the one thing that we want to really go now deeper into implementation and execution. And so we did that, and they have now, I don't know what the numbers are, but they really have launched this, and it's a multi-billion-dollar business that they're running with this whole thing. And so what was interesting for a company is that it didn't take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to do this, right? It took 3 months to get to that stage of really having the idea and the plan to really go forward.
Okay. So since you are an expert on the BMC model, so what are the areas that you think that the company or the executive should work on to get started to firstly understand the concept, and what are the things they need to do to get started?
Right, so I think the concept itself is something that people learn very quickly, right? If we do a workshop, we spend 45 minutes on it and people can play with it. That's kind of the beauty of the tool. I think that the difficulty in company is back to maybe what we were talking about, is the whole idea of being, entering this new mindset of dealing with uncertainty and dealing with stuff that's not fixed, and you have to be comfortable with this idea of searching for the right business model, as opposed to simply executing a plan, which is what companies are geared to do. They're built to execute plans more than searching for new ideas. So this thing, now what we see in companies more and more, but it's still something very nascent, is the whole idea of organizing a new space for doing that in companies. Basically a different space than the space that's used for running the business as usual. It's a space that's dedicated to exploring what the new opportunity is. And in there, it could actually be a physical space. It'd be like an incubator, right? Yeah. With the right culture, different types of incentives, different types of people, more kind of intrapreneurs and managers, all sorts of different processes and activities. And so this whole thing, I think, is a big opportunity for companies, especially for established companies, to embrace this whole idea of entrepreneurship and of getting to the next big thing for them.
Okay. So coming back to the work that you've been doing, and also the new book, Value Proposition. How do you get involved, becoming the co-author of this book, Value Proposition Design? Can you share a little bit more on this process and experience?
I got involved in the making of it. So it was a bit funny actually. It was a bit of a coincidence because I actually told myself, this was in I can't remember, 2-3 years ago now, in the summer, and I told myself, it'd be really great. I've been actually having that in the back of my mind, but I'd really love to write a book one day. And I think maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, I meet Alex, and he actually talks to me about doing a book. And he said, would you be interested? I'm like, well, I didn't think about writing a business book, or I had no idea what kind of book I wanted to write. But I said, all right, if that comes up, then for sure I'll get involved in this.
Okay.
So that's really how it started. It randomly.
So what are the models that you have studied? You believe that that is competing competing to the BMC model. Have you discovered any other competing ideas, and what are your thoughts on these competing ideas?
So, not to avoid the question, but I actually think for me this canvas and this whole toolbox is great because it integrates well with other ideas.
Okay.
So yes, there are some competing things, you could take like the lean canvas and things like that. They kind of take the idea a little bit differently. But for me, it's not so much competition. It's more about someone kind of adapting the methodology to something else that's useful for their purpose. But otherwise, I think it's more about integrating lean startup, integrating blue ocean strategy, all of these things. And the beauty of it is that it's actually agnostic of a particular way of or a particular direction in which you should go. It doesn't tell you where to go. It just gives you the tools to do what you want to do better. So.
Yeah. So to help us understand more about the landscape of startup ideas and startup theories, what do we need to watch? Who else do we need to watch, and who also is doing exceptional academic work in same area, and in building startups, and what made their work unique? Can you recommend some of these authors? That is a direct competition to the idea.
It is direct competition.
Yeah.
Insisting on the question. But so again, I don't think they're competitors, but I think and we talk about these ideas in the book, right? Early degrees in startup, deep learning, customer development. Those are actually ideas that work in combination with this. But obviously, the great work in pushing the whole movement forward.
Yeah.
A bit, kind of at the periphery of this, but for me, one great, you say, you asked about people in academia. Clayton Christensen at Harvard, right? Innovators Dilemma and all these things. I think he's really someone who's was able to go deep into the innovation process, and so I said before that I don't think schools are the best ways of learning.
Okay.
But if there is a counter-example, it's with people like this that are actually in school because they want to understand the fundamental forces at work, in the innovation process. And so he's a great guy. And otherwise, I think to round up this answer, I think I like going into blogs more than books. Because they feel more in tune with the time.
Okay.
Because as I said,
the publishing cycle is shorter and people can get instant feedback.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there is all sorts of quality, right, on blogs.
Yeah.
But there's really good ones that are actually, talking about fundamental ideas, yet at a point where they still feel new because they share experiences as they go. So I like Chris and Anderson, the whole makers movement, Y Combinator, what's his name, the founder of Y Combinator, I forget now. Alman's a new guy, but
Eugene?
What's that?
Paul Graham,
exactly. Paul Graham, he writes essays on more.
I read all of them.
I read all of them. So he's a good example for me of not an academician, but someone who talks about out of practice to do. I think that those things are inspiring for me.
Okay. So, talking about startups, do you have a future vision on how startups will be developed in 10 or 20 years from now? Looking down the road.
Wow, that's a tough one, huh?
Predicting the future.
Yeah, living in the future. But I think if you look at what's going on, because if you think of the future, it's really nobody can predict the future, right? But if you look at what's going on right now, you can start having an idea of what may be happening in the future, right? And so for me, if we look at what's happening right now, everything is developing at a kind of an exponential speed, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think of the world of startup, it's so much easier now to build a startup than it was before, because almost every one of us can have access to the tools of value creation, of building startups. Yeah. These tools are some of them, but obviously technology and media and social media and all of this. And also the physical space, the whole maker movement, 3D printing and all of this. So it's getting easier to build a startup. It's getting a lot easier to collaborate with people through the internet also and in the physical space. and it's getting easier to acquire customers, right?
Yeah.
So all of this is really going really at an exponential pace. So if you think of the future of startup, I think it's almost like every thought can become a startup now. You have a thought, you can actually materialize it now in the as a startup, and that means that there's going to be a lot of failures with this as well, right? Because not all thoughts are good. But it's okay because it also means that it's easier to fail, right? Because of all these tools being available and the cost of failure is being reduced drastically. So, and the cost of experimentation is being reduced drastically. So it's almost zero, right? The cost of experimentation is almost zero. So I think you're going to see a massive amount of startups. Someone's talking about, when they talk about China and India, they talk about 1 billion entrepreneurs, right? I can kind of see that coming. A lot more startups, a lot more failure, a lot more experimentation. And I think you might see also some sort of standardization in terms of, not in terms of the idea obviously, but in terms of how you describe the value creation process. And so I think that could lead to something where startups are a lot more easy to compare, a lot more easy to maybe invest in, so that those barriers are also reduced, which also helps with the acceleration.
Okay.
And I think one last thing I would say about this is that it feels like for me there's a link, and this is something I'm quite passionate about, there's a link between this whole movement of entrepreneurship and the whole movement of solving the problems of our time, right? The critical problems of our time, because again, with the internet, etc., we're all a lot more aware of what the problems are, maybe pollution or social problems or whatever, which creates passion and enthusiasm for people to solve them. And at the same time, when you build a company, you have a lot more of an incentive now to do the right thing, because everything is a lot more transparent and accessible to people, again with social media and all. So I think you have an incentive now to do the right thing, and you're empowered to do the right thing. So that's what I would say. I have no idea if I'm right or not, but that's what I would say right now.
Okay, thank you for that. And my last question before we go into the short break. And since you are a trainer yourself on this area, in this area, so what are the books you are reading right now, and can you share what you've learned so far, and what are the new edges? I think innovation is all about looking at the edges. So what are the books you're reading right now? Can you share those books names with us, and what are the edges that you are not so sure about but you are so curious that you want to learn?
Yeah. So actually, the book I'm reading right now is an old book. It's a classic.
Yeah.
It's called The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron. I don't know if you know it. It's sold millions of times, but it's one of those classics that talks about the creative process and how every one of us can be creative. It's in every one of us, and it's just about finding the path to your own creativity, which with all of what we've talked about now, I feel is almost the single most important thing to do right now. To invest in getting in tune with your own creativity. So that's one thing that I'm quite passionate about, creativity. In terms of the edges, the stuff at the periphery there, definitely this intersection between social and environmental problems, the whole world of sustainability and value creation is one. Obviously, anything that has to do with manufacturing these days, because of 3D printing and all of that, it's almost like the next revolution, right after what happened with media on the internet, could happen in the physical space and manufacturing. And then, I don't know much about these things, but obviously the whole intersection of biotech, digital, and anything else, maybe food, lifestyle, leisure, whatever is really, I think is gonna generate some big things in the future. And if you look at, now what it takes to compete, even in that space that used to be only reserved to, multi-billion-dollar laboratories, right? You now have people in their apartments in New York City that can actually invent a new molecule or a new, something that can actually disrupt this whole space. So you feel that this is a big one that's going to be, that's upon us, where there's going to be a lot of invention and potentially a lot of progress, maybe a lot of scary stuff as well. But I think it's a space where a lot will happen.
Okay, so thank you so much for this is the question I asked.
Do you think that value proposition canvas is the only plugin that business model canvas needs?
Probably not.
No? So there's new to come?
Yeah, nothing, there's probably something, if you've read the first book, there's something around the environment, the environment to the business model, which is the space in which you build a business model, thinking about your competitors, trends, the economic situations, and these kind of things. So it is also a plugin. It doesn't exist so much in the form of a tool. There's a set of cards, but that's already something that exists. But then there's all these things, if you think of the whole portfolio of activities that you do in terms of strategy making, if you think about vision, mission, culture, and all those types of things, they could actually all have their tools to integrate with something like that. So there's a lot more that could be coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, I have questions. Many people now are talking about the overthrowing the established business, especially the big enterprises, especially in the internet industry. But I also observed that for many of the big industries, they're not easily to be overthrown, because even though sometimes the small enterprises, they react more quickly to the changes of the environment, but sometimes once they know there's a new idea of this, even though you do it before the big enterprise do it, but once they know you have this kind of idea, because they have a very comprehensive and very good infrastructures, but because you are a startup enterprise, you don't have that kind of money, that kind of talents, and they have. Once they know, okay, you have this kind of business model, I can a little bit copy that and use my already very good infrastructures, and I can overtake it. So I can replace it. I totally can kill you. I mean, even though you're a small business, I copy a little bit that, and I have a lot of talents and cash, and I can do it. So is it very common, or is it also very frequently happening in business world, according to your observation?
Yeah, I think you're right that they have the option of doing that. But what I see is that they don't do it. Especially because of the incentive systems and the mindsets and the culture inside organizations. We're working with a big company in the US, and we're talking about this whole innovation process last week in New York, and they were saying, so we're talking, with just people from the organization, and they were saying how the big bosses, they've already made their millions, right? And so they don't really care so much about what's new, right? Then the next level down, they have everything to make their millions, based on the status quo, based on milking whatever they've already done. So these guys are also not incentivized to build something new and taking a risk. So that doesn't leave a lot of people, especially decision-making people, that are willing to invest into looking at startups, maybe replicating what they've done, maybe inventing something new. So it's a lot about this, less than the skills and the capability that they would have to do it. But I think so disruption is definitely happening. Just look at media industry or hotel industry now and these kind of things. But I think what's interesting that's happening is that the companies are starting to have different roles from startups. So a lot of companies now are seeing themselves as platforms to help startups create value and develop together an ecosystem, right? So Nike did that in digital health, for example, inviting startups to come, use their data, use the data that Nike has, use their assets, use their, some of their the resources they have, in order to create better startups that would then be connected with Nike too. So I think there's a nice mix that could happen there.
And let's do one more question, one last question.
According to your observation, which startup growth experience in Silicon Valley you can learn from? More, I think Airbnb is a very good example. Is there other example to learn from for especially small startups in China?
Well, so Xiaomi for me was amazing. I think maybe even more than Airbnb. In 4 years they've gone to 40 billion or something valuation, something crazy like this. Yeah. But Airbnb was a nice example in the sense that in a few years, I think now they have the second highest valuation, market valuation, in the whole hotel in the whole hotel industry, right? So this is a website that has the same valuation as companies owning buildings across the globe. So in terms of growth and in terms of disruption, this is obviously internet players have a big advantage in terms of scale like this. Yeah? But I mean, so there's a lot of examples out there, Twitter, Facebook, all the obvious ones.
Are there any specific entrepreneurs? I find Rick Hoffman is a very good entrepreneur to learn from.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, which guys in Silicon Valley is our example to learn from?
I don't know if I have one. I always, if I'm asked this question outside China, I say Jack Ma, because he's very inspiring in terms of how he talks, what he's done, how he thinks also bigger than business. I think is more inspiring to me than anyone else in Silicon Valley that I can think of, for this reason, that he's big thinking. But I couldn't come up with a more. I like Ray Hoffman. I think he's also a visionary like that.